Hey, Mark. So
Yes.
I remembered a comment that scrolled along the bottom of the screen here at the Voice of College Football. I believe the commenter's name was Gerardo or maybe Gerardo. And he made the point, if the Big Ten gets Notre Dame and the Pacific Northwest, is that going to, reduce Notre Dame and the other members' shares, or are they all going to get a larger cut, even though it's going to add to the overall conference membership and therefore, slice the pie in more directions? To answer that question, Gerardo, I think that the overall cut's going to be higher. Like Notre Dame is a total game changer, unique in all of college sports. Notre Dame jumping in, any concerns about slicing the pie, 17 ways instead of 16 or 19 ways instead of 18, Notre Dame's value is going to offset any diminishment there. The overall take home revenue for every Big Ten school, even if you're talking about a 19 or 20 team conference, is going to be larger. So just wanted to address that particular comment from one of your viewers here on the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, and to add
there
to
we
what
go. There's Gerardo's comments now scrolling across the screen.
And to add to what Matt is saying, right now the Big Ten contract is in the $700 million range. With the addition of Los Angeles, the new projection is it'll go over $1 billion. You add Notre Dame, which I get, everybody hates Notre Dame. I get it. But I don't hate them. I do get why people hate them. But that puts you in a whole other stratosphere now, not because of media markets, but because one, you're not gonna cut Notre Dame's knees out from under them because you're asking them to give up their NBC exclusive contract, in order to join this. And so they're going to have to come in at an elevated level, and it raises the expectations. And, $1 billion then becomes chump change compared to what you're going to get if you've got Oregon, Washington, Notre Dame. All of a sudden you've got the Seattle market and you've got the theoretical Portland market, even though it's Eugene. And then you've got Notre Dame, and holy moly, you're off and running at that point.
And, I still don't understand. Someone has not given me a convincing line of argument as to why Notre Dame has to join a conference.
Thank you.
One thing, Tony, you and I talked last week on the Voice of College Football about, just Notre Dame having to split a revenue pie 17 ways. Notre Dame was offered the Big Ten. The Big Ten has had its door open to Notre Dame for the past decade. So if Notre Dame didn't take a 14-way revenue split several years ago, why would it take an 18 or 19-way revenue split now? But the other part of this is that Notre Dame gets to pick and choose its schedule. So like Notre Dame could renegotiate maybe even on a per game basis for the road games, the games aren't under the NBC umbrella. And Notre Dame can leverage these negotiations. Like, I do not understand why Notre Dame has to be in a conference. And Notre Dame has the ACC scheduling agreement. Okay, so maybe if you're Notre Dame, you then schedule like a 3-game Big Ten agreement with Fox, and you schedule like a 2-game. You already have the USC and Stanford games. Then you fill in maybe 2 other Big 12 games with ESPN. I mean, it's just Notre Dame can rearrange the pieces of its chessboard in ways no other school can, and that is precisely because it is independent and it's getting all the television money. It's not having to share it. So no one's given me the real argument for, now is why Notre Dame has to do this. I still do not see why this moment is uniquely different.
I think it's less incumbent upon them to do it now than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, because what we're seeing is a diminishing of conferences, of the number of conferences, which means whatever playoff system we expand to in 2025, it's going to have a boatload of that large teams. It's not going to just be this conference, the 5 conference champions. We're not going to have 5 conferences anymore. So you're going to have a lot more at-large teams, which means an 11-1, 12-0, probably even 10-2 Notre Dame team is going to make it without having to worry about whether they won the conference championship or not.
Totally agree. Like, the SEC and Big Ten are going to be so large that both of those conferences, who obviously call the shots, they have the most leverage in the room, they're going to want as many at-large bids as possible. And so that necessitates at least a 12-team playoff, probably 16, and possibly more than 16. And within that framework, yes, Notre Dame can lose one game, maybe even two, and get into that larger playoff framework. Totally agree.